going to move on to our keynote presentation. Etienne, how are you? I think your microphone might be muted there, Etienne. Hi, Etienne. How's it going? How are you?
Good, good, very well.
Good. I can see you and hear you, but if you'd like to share your screen when you have a chance, perfect. That's great. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about where you're broadcasting from today, Etienne?
So today I'm in Portugal. I'm at home because Portugal has been in lockdown for about 2 weeks.
And how are you coping with the newfound isolation?
Well, isolation has never been a problem for me because I enjoy being alone. Actually, I'm not alone. I'm with my wife here, and but it's our work that has, you know, I was all ready to come to Ireland and be part of the conference, and now everything is changed. So a lot of our work now has to be, we have to scramble to start to work in new ways.
Well, listen, I'm so glad that you could join us online, and I'm really looking forward to your contribution here today. Just a little bit of housekeeping for you all joining us today. There are a few ways that you can engage with both each other and with the panelists here today. I see that some of you have already begun to use the chat feature. So if you want to engage with each other, you want to make some comments, maybe you want to drop some links that you might think might be useful for the other participants of the session today, you can drop that in the chat feature, which is at the bottom of your window. You can also, if you want to ask questions directly of Etienne, you can use the Q&A feature. So if there is a question you want to put directly to him, use the Q&A feature, and I'll be monitoring those throughout the sessions, and I'll put them to Etienne at an appropriate point as we go through. Just so you know, we'll also be engaging with you later on in the session through a Zoom poll, which is a straightforward poll that will allow you to answer a direct question that we've posed, and that'll just pop up directly in your window. And later on again in the session, we're going to ask you to use a different platform called Mentimeter. So I would ask that if you have access to a second device handy, for example, if you're watching on a laptop, but you also have a smartphone, that you keep that device nearby and handy so that you can use it to engage us at that point on Menti. If that all sounds a bit like double Dutch, don't fear, we'll explain it all in simpler terms as we move through the session later on. And just to explain some more about the genesis of this session. So Andrew mentioned about the document being released today. So if you go to the AHEAD website after the session, you can find this document at the top of our news items. It's a conceptual framework of UDL for Irish FET. And the key output of this overall project is a set of guidelines for practitioners on how to understand and apply UDL in FET settings. So those guidelines are currently in development, as Andrew mentioned, and will be released later on in the year. But the document released today is a background scoping document which charts the different theories of universal design in education and identifies some key concepts which need to be considered when developing the guidelines and planning the implementation of UDL, making UDL real in FET basically. So I'd like to thank Mary Quirk and Patricia McCarthy for their Trojan work in putting that document together for us mostly last year. So if you'd like to find out more about what UDL itself is, I mentioned already that next Friday's session, I'd highly recommend you go to ahead.ie/conference2020 and sign up for the John Kelly Award for UDL final next Friday. And that's where 3 educators across FET and higher ed will showcase how they use UDL to guide them in transforming their teaching activities. So that's where you can see really what this thing actually looks like in practice when you implement it well. So coming back a little bit to the focus of today, and I mentioned the document today that's been released. One of the key concepts identified in that document is the importance of providing both formal and informal opportunities for staff to connect and share practice when seeking to create sustainable cultures of inclusion, and the added importance of this in the FET sector itself as a multidisciplinary and diverse sector. So we might touch on this document a bit later on in the session, but I just wanted to give you some context. That's really why we have Etienne here today, because he's a social learning expert who I think can help us to understand and cultivate these social learning opportunities for staff. So one of the key concepts recognized, and Andrew referenced it, is the who of learning. And that's really all about that piece, about how can we get staff together to collectively understand UDL and to collectively implement it. So I'm going to hand over now to Etienne. So just to give some background, Etienne is not an expert in inclusion. He's not here to talk about inclusion really, but he is very much an expert in social learning and the idea of learning networks and communities of practice. So welcome, Etienne, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so yes, I'm not an expert in inclusion. So we're going to do this somewhat interactively to also explore together what is possible. But I thought I'd start with some stories to make this idea very concrete. So here you have the head of treasury in Southeast Asia brought together by the World Bank to think together how they can manage the treasury in their countries. And they are sitting around this table. They come together about 3 times a year, and they are sitting together to develop some guidelines about how to interact with the central bank, something that they cannot just inherit from the Netherlands or from Ireland. They have to develop a local set of guidelines for doing that. And so that's what they are doing at this table. At the end of the meeting, they'll have some guidelines, they'll go back, they'll try, they'll come back and comment on what worked, what didn't work, maybe refine the guideline. And over time, they're really developing a shared practice which they adapt to their own context. This is actually online. We are together and we are doing what we call a case clinic. That is, a member brings a problem right now. It's Kathy, who is on the screen on the lower left-hand part of the picture with all the participants from all over the world, and she has a problem about developing a community with people who are part-time teachers in further education, actually. And so she's presenting her problem. Everybody is working together to help her form some solution. And next time we meet, she'll reflect on whether that worked or not. And that was a very active session from people. Someone is from Dubai, someone is from Italy, someone is from California, someone is from Canada, working together to solve a problem together.
Etienne, I might jump in because there's a question from the floor, and you may be looking to address this further on as you go, but it's kind of coming up here because you're already talking about maybe different types of networks. And so somebody's just asked the simple question, actually, what is a learning network? I mean, how do we define it? Does it have a fixed definition, or is it just a place where people can come together and share? And what's your take on that?
I'm going to get to that. I just wanted to share a few concrete stories to make it very concrete to start with, and then I'm going to do the formal definition after the stories.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. These are financial leaders in Kyrgyzstan, and what they're doing here is a debate. There was a question of whether a certain budget item should be decided locally or at the federal level, and they're basically just debating the pros and cons of that question. And you can see the two teams there debating at the table, and you can see in the back the rest of the group, because we had divided the group, the community in 2 groups, one pro, one con, and so they are supporting their team, pushing an argument. And the reason why this is a good activity for a community is that sometimes the danger of a community is that it's a bit more difficult to disagree when everybody seems to agree on an idea, and you think, oh, there's a problem here. It can be a bit difficult to express that in a community. And so when you make a game of exploring the pros and the cons of an idea, then you make it okay to disagree. And so that's why we like that activity as a way to promote learning in a community, in a network. These people are internal auditors in Eastern Europe, and they are developing a new practice for their country as they move out of the Soviet Union. Some of them want to join the EU. They need to develop that new practice. And so one of their activities is to develop manuals together that they can adapt to their own country. So here, a good thing is when there is work you have to do anyway yourself, to do it with others makes it easy and more effective. So that's what they're doing. This is now a slide you don't have in what we have sent you. because I thought I would add a few communities on campus. So these are people at the University of Central Lancashire working on innovation and enterprise. So you can see there are different groups at different tables because the community has divided into small practice group working on specific issues. The group that you see in front here, they are exploring the question of how does the engagement of the university with the region change the student experience and develop students who are more confident in being entrepreneur when they come out of their studies. So that's a good example of a community across a campus on an issue that they all feel passionate about. There's actually a voluntary community that both academics and professional staff have joined.
Etienne, I've got a very practical question coming in.
Yep.
It's in relation to the slide you showed a couple of slides back about the case clinic, and I think it's very, very relevant in the day and age that we live in. Someone's actually asking about the technology piece there, about do you know what the platform is that's being used, and have you got
Adobe
recommendations? Adobe Connect.
Adobe Connect, yes. Yep,
so
yep.
That's great.
Which is a very good technique. It's kind of complex as a system compared to Zoom. It has a lot of capabilities of changing the screen dynamically and so on and so forth.
Okay, and how do you find the differences between that connection in the online setting and the face-to-face setting? Do you feel there's a different dynamic that goes on there?
Well, definitely, it's not the same, and actually it should not be the same. Like for instance, one thing that we can do in Adobe Connect is work on a document together. So you can open one of those boxes and it's almost like a Google Doc. And so, for instance, in that session, later on, you don't see it, but there was some brainstorming where different people were working on a shared document together to brainstorm ideas for Catherine. So it's interesting. For us, we would say that depending on the numbers, something like a case clinic where a member has a very specific problem, but it becomes a learning opportunity for the entire community, that works just as well online as it does face-to-face. Again, I have to be careful because of inclusion, okay? And so all the people who are there on the screen there's no need here to be careful about someone who is blind or someone who is hard of hearing or something like this. So I want to be modest in simply saying, oh, you can just move things online, especially if the question of inclusion is salient.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very salient question here in the education system as we rapidly try to respond to the COVID-19 response.
That's right. Yeah, no, I'm sure
everyone's grappling with those issues. Yeah. Thanks, Etienne.
And then this one is a community that we worked with a few years back, mental health. So across British Columbia, all the professionals who were dealing with mental health on campus created a province-wide community where they had 1 or 2 meetings a year face-to-face, and then a lot of online webinar and interactions in between to really help each other deal with issues of mental health on campus. Actually, this community in British Columbia was so successful that now there are calls to make it a nationwide community with across Canada with chapters in the different provinces. And you can see here on the screen some pictures, a manual that they developed out of a workshop that I did over there, and then this visual that was kind of a vision about this idea that it takes a whole campus to deal with mental health, not just a few professionals.
I love that. That really echoes Etienne with the document that's coming out today. You know, the subtitle of that document, Andrew mentioned it, is "Where Inclusion is Everybody's Business." So I love that that's echoing some of the work that you've been doing, and as a social, a social learning expert, building communities of practice.
Yeah.
That we already have kind of some synergy there that we can work on.
Yeah. And for these people who are on campus and deal with issues like suicide and substance abuse, to find peers on other campus who are also dealing with these difficult issues was really, I think it was quite transformative. Okay, so now let's become a bit more formal about the notion of a learning network or a community of practice. Because very often learning is viewed as a transmission of certainty from someone who knows to someone who doesn't. But a community of practice or a learning network is a very different approach to learning. First of all, in a learning network, you want to create social learning spaces, moments of engagement that create social learning. And how do you do that? Well, first of all, people come there because they care to make a difference. There's something they want to do to themselves or to the world that is going to make a difference. I guess for you it would be including more people, finding ways to develop learning systems that include a more diverse set of students. So caring to make a difference is really at the core of what makes a learning network important and inspiring. Then, out of this desire to make a difference, people engage with each other in their uncertainty, in that state where they don't quite know how to achieve the difference that they want to make. And that's what they offer into the space. So while often learning is thought as a transmission of certainty, here we are saying learning depends on the engagement of uncertainty. And you can understand that from a social perspective, engaging uncertainty requires a certain context where it's okay to be uncertain, where it's okay to say, hey, I don't know how to do this, please help me. It's okay to offer that as a learning gift to the group, and to engage at that edge of what you know. And then to really pay attention to what happens, to pay attention to people's reaction to what you say, to pay attention to things that could surprise you. And it may seem that paying attention is unproblematic. It's actually, paying attention is very problematic, because you have to often unlearn what you know in order to see what comes at you. So these three things, caring to make a difference, means that people have a sense that they can make a difference. Sometimes we work with communities where people are so under the thumb of an organization that caring to make a difference is something new, and engaging uncertainty. In some contexts, engaging uncertainty could be viewed as a weakness, as opposed to a strength. We say, no, engaging uncertainty is a strength. And then paying attention. Sometimes in social context, a problem with people of power is that power allows you not to pay attention, and that's where power can be an obstacle to learning, because it allows you to say, oh no, I don't have to pay attention to others. I just proceed with what I think. So it's very delicate. A learning network is a very socially delicate thing to sustain, to bring into being, and then to sustain over time.
I think, first of all, I think it's really interesting that you're mentioning the kind of power dynamics here, because actually these came up in yesterday's session too. So there's actually a theme arising here that, that to relinquish power is actually something that can be liberating and can serve everybody on your campus. That's a really interesting theme that's coming out. But from the chat box here, there's just to echo, there's a lot of people kind of echoing your piece about accepting uncertainty and engaging directly with it. And particularly, I think that's just resonating with a lot of people in the current age that we live in, because we're all living in very uncertain times. In education, there's a lot of educators out there struggling to make that move that's been, in a sense, suddenly enforced on them. And, you know, some are taking to it very creatively, others, you know, are maybe struggling a bit more. But I think that's really engaging with the group here.
Yeah. And you know, to find a space where you can actually do that, engage your uncertainty, is really a relief in some sense. Yeah. And so then, to finish the formal definition, what happens over time when people do that? Well, here is a little cartoon, and I'm gonna describe this cartoon in some detail, because it shows how learning evolves in a community of practice or a learning network. So yeah, we want to make a difference. Whether the difference we want to make is exactly the same or different, what happens is that we recognize each other as learning partner. And if you now move to the second little square, so you are with others who recognize the importance of the difference you want to make. So they can see that what you're doing is important, even if it's not exactly what they're doing themselves. They can see that what you are doing is important. They appreciate what you want to try to achieve, and they appreciate the uncertainty that you have. And that's where practitioners can come together, because for practitioners know that practice is hard, that you never have all the information, you never act out of certainty. In fact, expertise in practice is often to be able to move productively under condition of uncertainty, as opposed to simply implementing your certainty. And so people appreciate that of each other. They find value in being with each other in that state, you know. But out of that comes ideas, new tools, tips, connections with other people. So it's not like you wallow in uncertainty. You use uncertainty as a way to produce resources that can help people in what they're trying to do. Then, very often in learning theory, learning stops there, because you have got your ideas, you've got new knowledge or something like this. But for us, learning does not stop there. Learning continues, because you take that back into your context and you try to put that to use, you try to do something with it. This is just as creative as coming up with a new idea, to try to make something out of it. You see the effect. And whether it was a success or whether it's a failure, you come back to your learning network, you come back to your community saying, you know, this advice you gave me 2 months ago, I tried to do something with it and it really didn't work, or it worked really well, you should try it too. So think of a learning network as a kind of loop where the engagement of uncertainty gives rise to new resources, which allows you to change your practice, which, if you pay attention to the effect that it has, allows you to come back with some feedback to the whole group. So think of a learning network as a kind of learning loop like that.
There's two kind of related questions here then coming in for you. One from Jennifer, which is about how do you can cultivate a culture of engaging with uncertainty, especially in formal teaching and learning environments where the expectation is that you, the teacher, have the right answer. I think, just before you jump in on that one, Etienne, I just might mention that I think Jennifer might be interested in the whole concept of the UDL piece, because a huge tenet of that, a huge sort of driving force behind it, is that relinquishing of power, that you as a teacher recognize your role as a kind of guider of the student rather than as the sort of sage on the stage, if you like. You might have some comments on that one.
Well, I mean, we are not saying that all learning has to take place like this, you know. Some things are, some certainties are just good, you know. Like if I'm learning that a community has discovered that the universe is 13.8 billion years old, I'm not going to go and debate that. You see what I mean? So for factual information, sometimes just transmission is fine, you know. It's just that for problems of practice, then it's more complex than that, you know. It's because you can have some information, but what to do with it is a very complex thing. And so to have a community that can engage in that complexity with you over time is really, it really makes a difference. Now, there may be some courses where this is an approach that is taken in some problem-based pedagogies. They force students to engage with a complex problem where there is no clear solution up front. And so they have adopted something like that as a pedagogical heuristic.
Excellent. I think there's another question, right? I suppose a practical question about the function or how they function, these learning networks. So Sinead has asked, from your experience, how can communities avoid the pitfall of hegemony? I think you might be dealing with this a bit later on when we talk about enablers and barriers to comes to practice. So you can decide if you want to answer this question later.
Well, if by hegemony they mean that you have dominant voices, then yes, I think the art of developing a community like this is to pay attention to voices, and to pay attention to voices that may be silenced by the community. And that's why the engagement of uncertainty is such an important thing, because what you want is you want this engagement of uncertainty to be well distributed across the community. A difference between a classroom, a traditional classroom, and a community is often that only one person does not need to engage in uncertainty, it's the teacher, and everybody else does. So this unequal distribution of uncertainty creates a different kind of learning system than the one we're talking about here.
Great, thanks, Etienne. There's a whole bunch of questions coming in, but I think just to say we'll try to get to them all as we move through the session. But I'm going to let you continue for now, and maybe we can take some more at the end if we don't get into everything.
Yeah. So we thought that in that poll we would ask you two questions. Do you have opportunities to participate in the kind of network or community of practice in your college organization that we are talking about? And then if the answer is yes, are they informal, just around lunch or something like this? Or are they formal in a sense that they are recognized and supported by the organization?
So just while that poll is going on, I wouldn't mind if it's okay at the end just to give some of my own reflections on a learning network that I've participated in and has been just transformative into my understanding of inclusion. I think it's relevant for this session. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Link Network. So the Link Network was originally established as a funded EU project in 2008, stands for Learning Inclusively Network and Know-How. And it's basically a small network of organizations who all share the same ultimate goal of the full inclusion of students with disabilities in further and higher education. So it was funded for 3 years through Erasmus, but since 2011, we have remained kind of a functioning network by working creatively and to achieve ways to continue working together outside of a kind of formal funding stream. So I currently chair the network, and there's 7 organizations from 7 countries represented. So Belgium, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Slovenia, Sweden, and the UK. We meet face to face as a full group once a year, usually over 2 days, and another time for a much shorter meeting, more informally. That usually runs parallel to a related conference. We were actually due to meet on Wednesday prior to the AHEAD conference, which has obviously been scuppered due to the virus. So if you're watching Link colleagues, first of all, big hello to you all, and I'm sorry that I haven't been in touch yet to reschedule the meeting online, but I'll do so very shortly. Just a bit of admin over the webinar there. I would describe the Link Network, I suppose, as an action learning network. So it's very much focused on learning from each other rather than producing new work. Basically, the function of it is to share what's happening in each other's countries, to kind of collectively understand or collectively enhance our understanding of what inclusion is and how it's practiced internationally. So to kind of broaden our horizons on this and to help each other solve problems and react to issues in our respective countries. I believe that the network really helps us all to be better organizations in delivering better results in our own territories. But there's countless issues that have come up for us here in Ireland that I've been able to just either pick up the phone or do it through one of the more formal channels at meetings, raise an issue, get responses from other people. So it's kind of really nice, and it's comforting, to be honest, as a professional, and it's really helped me to develop my understanding of inclusion to be much broader than maybe just what we understand nationally. And one of the interesting kind of new developments within our link network is that we've started these much more focused subgroups that we're calling learning groups, where much smaller numbers of about 4 to 6 people participate in online group sharing with a much more niche focus. I, for example, am a member of the UDL learning group, which is chaired by Eleanor from Universal in Norway. Hello, Eleanor, if you're watching. So it's been really valuable for us just because it enables us to dig down deep into what's happening into each country, examine the kind of success stories around promoting UDL, and it's given me so many ideas for our work.
So that's something that we often do with communities. Actually, I was mentioning the community on innovation and enterprise at UCLan. They also formed what we call practice groups. We call them learning groups, the same idea. Something that people feel very passionate about, that they want to go deeper in, and then they bring back questions and ideas to the whole community. So they're not separate communities, but they work on something important for the community on behalf of everybody. I'm assuming it's the same. It's the same for you.
Yeah.
So we find that it is really important to go back and forth between being in small groups and then bringing back questions and insights to the whole group.
Okay, I think should we share our poll results, Etienne? Take a look.
Yeah.
So Zoom is just calculating the final results there for us, and I should be able to share that with you all very shortly. Just while Zoom is doing its thing, I can kind of give you some initial headlines. So can you guys see that now?
Wow.
That's really interesting that there's already a very, very high percentage of people who have the opportunity to participate in those learning networks, communities of practice in the college. It's very heartening to see that, isn't it?
Amazing. Yeah. This is fantastic.
In your experience, is that a kind of typical level of response from the kind of sessions you do?
No, I'm very surprised.
Well, Ireland is a very small country, and we're already very well connected as people. We often joke here at the end that you can't go anywhere without meeting someone that you know. You know, you take a walk into town, so you can't do anything privately. So maybe that's a reflection of our culture here in Ireland.
But you have 50% of people who say both formal and informal. So that means that there are 50% plus 18%. So you have 68% of people who have a more formal community, which means that the organization is recognized. That is quite high.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear that we're doing okay.
Yeah.
Starting point there. Okay, I'm going to stop that share for now, and maybe we can move on through the session.
Okay. So is this window going to disappear automatically, or do I have to do something? Oh, close. Yes. Okay. So I thought that I'd share with you a few things that we have heard when we ask people, why is your community or your learning network important to you? And I'll read a few just to help solve problems. So to have someone I can turn to with a problem I have, who would understand very quickly why this is a problem, why this is difficult, and engage with me. But sometimes, as Dara was saying, to hear stories across contexts, to say, oh, wow, that's the way you're doing that over there. Oh, wow, that's interesting. I wonder if I could get something from it. So to hear a broader set of stories than just your local context, to reflect on practice in order to improve it, to build shared understanding, like you were saying, that maybe together you have a new understanding of what inclusion means. That's really important. Sometimes to keep up with change in some fields where change happens very quickly. It's good to be together, maybe to read some papers together, to keep up with a field that is evolving, to cooperate on innovation. Sometimes to try something new is easier to do if you have the backing of a whole community or network with you. And sometimes to find a voice to gain strategic influence. So some communities, one of their role is to have a collective voice to make policy recommendations or to comment on some organizational or institutional decisions. So these are the kind of things that people reflect when they are asked, so why do you spend this time with those people? So now we were going to very quickly ask you two questions that you should respond to with just one or two words, very, very brief, because we're going to do a Wordle out of it. Two questions. What are the barriers to starting and sustaining inclusive learning networks in your college? And what are the enablers that you find are critical?
So just for everyone, if they do have a separate device to hand, that's the handiest way to do it. Just pick up your phone. You go to menti.com, that's MENTI.com, and you enter the code 810088, and that should bring you to the two questions that we're asking here today. So I'm going to leave that slide up for a moment and just have a wee chat again. I'm just going to come back slightly to link this into the document that's released today. And again, you can get this document on ahead.ie at the top of our newsfeed with the conceptual framework for Irish of UDL for Irish FET. So it is kind of a background scoping document that charts some of the theory of universal design in education and identifies some key concepts to be considered in the implementation of UDL in FET. So one concept identified is the application of CAST's model of UDL. If anybody didn't catch that earlier, by the way, that's universal design for learning. So CAST's model of UDL basically highlights or asks educators to consider when designing their curriculum, providing multiple means of engagement, which is the why of learning, multiple means of representation, which is the what of learning, and multiple means of action and expression, which is the how of learning. But one of the other sort of key concepts arising from the document, it's proposed that for FET that we need to look at the who of learning. So this is recognizing the diversity of provision at FET, the diversity of settings that FET is delivered in, the diversity of practitioners who are doing delivery in terms of professional backgrounds, their understanding of UDL. So we need to respect that diversity as we seek to promote and implement UDL and to support practitioners to learn from each other by creating engaging opportunities for them to share their practice and their understanding of UDL. So just again, that's kind of just a link back into what we're doing here today. That's why we're talking about it. And in terms of FET, there was actually a really interesting project that I had I've completed with FET practitioners. So it was done with Cork Education and Training Board, which is the PLC colleges in Cork. So that brought teachers together there with responsibility for supporting students with disabilities across the 6 PLC colleges together for actually the first time. So they'd never actually met these people. And so they came together, and over the course of a year, a series of meetings, which basically were structured like training opportunities, followed by the opportunity to discuss and engage and pull things apart. They looked at their own policies, they looked at their own practices, and they learned about key concepts that would help them in their role. And they kind of discussed then how those concepts would apply to the settings that they were working in. And just the response from that was absolutely wonderful in terms of the practitioners involved really just said that the opportunity to do that sort of engagement, to have that support there when they were coming up against issues, that they could connect with each other, bounce ideas off each other. And I'm really pleased to say that that network has continued after the length of a project. So even though when I had a step back, that network has come together and taken on its own life. And it actually resulted in some structural change as well. It actually resulted in the hiring from Cork ETB, which is the centralised body, of an active inclusion officer. That was one of the outcomes of the network coming together, and it was the network themselves that recommended that outcome. So that, I think that was a really nice demonstration of how these things can work and what it looks like when things go well, and you know that a project can actually come together like that and result in hardcore kind of outcomes that you can see.
That's a beautiful story, really beautiful.
If anybody's interested in that project, you can see more about it at ahead.ie/AIN, and I'll drop the link for that into the chat box in a few moments. But for now, I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you can all see that. Can you see that, Etienne?
Yeah.
So here we're looking at some of the barriers that people have put in for learning for starting inclusive learning networks in your college. Any thoughts from the large words that come out? So just so everybody can understand what's on screen here, it's a wordle of all of the different words that you've inputted into that Menti question. Some of the big words, so the bigger words have been entered more times by you. So the biggest word I'm saying, it's a very common one that we all can relate to, is time.
Yeah.
And other big words are funding, interest, ignorance, fear, awareness, willingness. So I see culture is coming up quite big there as well, and that came up in yesterday's session too. Leadership, also a very big one. Any thoughts on what's arising there?
So this one is the barriers, right?
That's right, yeah.
Time, yes, time is key. And that's why and you will see in my next slide, when we talk about the enablers and the barriers, what we call high value for time, is key. That what the learning network or the community does has to help people in their work so that they can save time as opposed to simply investing time. Leadership, yes, it is true that that is key, and that many communities peter out because a leader for some reason leaves the community or is taken as their time taken up by something else. Power, I think we've already talked a little bit about how power dynamics are completely integral to the question of the learning capability of a group. Yeah, that's really a good point.
I think as well, I mean, culture is coming up fairly strongly there too, and I think that resonates with the cultural piece, because the power dynamics are kind of so closely intertwined with culture of the culture of the institution or college that you're functioning out of.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting thing, because a learning network is also a mini culture, And so, I'm sorry, there's someone at the door. So a learning network, a community of practice, is also a kind of mini culture in a way. And it's also a chance to create a culture that is different from the organization. I was interviewing people who were participating in a community in a healthcare system in Canada, where they were doing public engagement. And so it was very political. And the person said, my community is the only place where I can let my hair down. So for her, the community was almost like a little cultural cocoon where they could actually counteract the culture of the organization by being together. So the relationship between culture and a community of practice or a learning network is a subtle one, because it's not simply that you inherit the culture, you can also create your own.
So I have just a question here that relates to, I can see that leadership is coming up quite strongly here. So Angela asks, is it ever the case that motivation for the establishment of social learnings doesn't come from organizational leadership, but rather from the people who are passionate about a topic within an organization? Is this the case? If this is the case, how can solutions and effects of participation become embedded in change within the organization? So how do we move? First of all, can these learning networks develop from the grassroots? And if they can, how do we take it from the grassroots to have change at a more senior level?
Well, so first of all, they mostly come from the grassroots. And so what you need at some point is some awareness in the organization of the value of those networks. So if you don't have that, they remain somewhat marginalized. They can be very helpful. They can do a lot of good things, but they will not gain the kind of influence on the organization that is possible. So in some sense, it is both grassroots and top-down. The one that are purely top-down usually do not work very well, unless they meet something that is bottom-up inherently. Okay, so it's like if you plant a flower, you can plant a flower, but for that flower to grow, it still has to do its own growing. You cannot pull on it to make it grow. So in some sense, there is something inherently where local ownership is very important.
Excellent. I've got some other questions flying in here. I don't know. What do you think? In the interest of time, Etienne, should we move on and try and address some of these maybe at the end when some people might
Yeah.
have to clock off? Would that be the best way to do this? So we might
Maybe
just
some
move
people
on.
may have to leave. So
Yeah. So maybe we'll look at the enablers that people have said. So Mentimus might take a second here to load up this screen. Just while that's loading up there, so Sean has asked two questions kind of that are both related to the same thing. So one is, what is Etienne's familiarity for using communities of practice to develop collaborative research? And if there is networks out there that are good examples. And then he's asked a kind of related question, and he said, can communities of practice have defined outcomes, or does that constrain creativity? For example, he wishes to develop a community of practice for research. Does producing an outcome mitigate against the aims of the social network to begin with?
well, I have I don't have awareness of a network of collaborative researchers. What I've been involved in are collaborative research projects that have taken a community of practice approach, a social learning approach to doing research together. So if you think of a focus group, for instance, right? The researcher has some uncertainty and they ask questions of the focus group, but they don't share their uncertainty. They don't engage their uncertainty. They just extract, if you will, some information from that focus group in response to their questions. In collaborative research, ideally, there is really a mutual engagement of uncertainty where the learning comes from that distributed engagement of uncertainty and not simply asking questions of your subjects. I don't know if that's what you mean, but what I've seen actually, interestingly, it was on learning disability at the University of Brighton, a project where really the community was formed out of academics, practitioners in the community, parents, and even students, all involved in a participatory research project together, even writing academic papers in the end together.
Very nice. I see. So do you want to have a look here at our enablers that the group
Yeah,
have
yeah.
said? So just
Yeah.
describe.
I agree that leadership is a very important part but it's a different kind of leadership. It's not leaders and followers. It's leaders as enablers, leaders as people who take some responsibility, some initiative for keeping a learning space open. So it's a different kind of leadership than the traditional concept of leadership.
Just to describe some of the other key words that are coming up here. So champions is there. So that's people, again, that kind of goes back, I think, to the grassroots. Although you can have champions at a leadership level and a grassroots level too, of course. The passion of staff, commitment, technology. So do we have technological supports that can make these things happen? We have resources, interest, openness, collaboration, innovation. They're all words that are coming up very, very strong in this. Anything that's jumping out at you there, Etienne?
Well, as I said, so when we say leadership here, we have to understand that social learning leadership is a specific kind of leadership, and that over time you would like the leadership in a network to become more distributed. People feel more ready to take initiative and lead the community in certain ways. Actually, we even have a technique to create groups that take on different leadership tasks in the community to distribute that leadership.
I just noticed on that my colleague Anne Heelan from Ahead has said that the Cork network, which she was heavily involved in, her and Christine Hines were the main people from the Ahead side, and then all the great practitioners in Cork EGTB kind of led by Liz Moynihan in Cork, but she's just referenced there that the Cork network had the support of senior management in terms of the allocation of time and resources. So that was kind of a key component of making that work, you know.
Yeah.
So they also saw the connection to the senior leadership saw the connection between this community and the strategic goals of Cork ETB. So they identified that link, and they had the I suppose the vision as a leadership group to identify that link and see that it was important.
Right. Yeah, no, the connection with the organization. In some organization, if you want to have a community that is supported by the organization, you have to find someone in the management team who is going to sponsor your community. So by sponsoring, they mean to create a connection between your community, which is a horizontal system, and the vertical hierarchy, so that the two are well integrated.
So what do you think, Etienne? Will we move on to
we can move on. That's great. Yeah.
I'm just going to stop my share here.
Yeah, and I'm going to start.
As you're doing that, I might just flick through some of the others. So Etienne, this question links back. I actually missed it earlier on, and it's a kind of more practical, functional question about how these networks are formed in terms of who is actually at the table. So Mary asks, in relation to the mental health gathering that you mentioned earlier on, the kind of gatherings that were looking at the whole college approach to mental health, she's wondering, where was the range of services that are engaging with the issues included? So she's coming from a guidance counselling context herself. So I'm kind of pointing out that there may be several government policy expectations, etc. So is there a range of stakeholders that can ensure that whatever you're working on is meaningful in the results, you know, that the respective, the range of views at the table are important, I think is what Mary is saying. So she's saying kind of that's a real challenge, really.
Yes, so because social learning, the capability in social learning is very much defined by the social fabric of the group, the question of voices is very important. And it's not like always the same. I was working, for instance, in a big organization. It was an engineering company. The engineers said no managers in our communities, because they said if the managers are there are all sorts of conversations we cannot have. So they were saying that's a voice that we want to have in the community only by invitation. They can come, we will invite them if we have a question for them, but we don't want them to be members. Because they had understood that that voice in the community would disrupt the learning capability of the group. On campus, in BC campus, actually for a while, the leader of the community was actually a student who had mental health issues, and was seconded to take some leadership. I don't know if it was the leader. He had a leadership responsibility in the community, because they felt that it was important to have the student voice in the community, even though most of the membership were professionals who were supporting students with mental health in the campus.
Again, that sort of harks back, doesn't it, to our power dynamics and being ready to relinquish that. And
also the importance of power and the importance of voice. Which voice are essential to which voice are essential to the learning of the community? Actually, I have a little story that has to do with learning disability. I was working with a group who was talking about learning disability in schools and in the community mental health professionals, and the relationship between the two. And we were at a conference, we were having a meeting, but there was a group of students with learning disability there who had done a dance for the conference. You can imagine this kind of thing. And the group said, they were having a meeting outside of the conference, and they said, hey, why don't we invite the kids in? It was so interesting, because the whole conversation had been about whether you integrate the curriculum for people with learning disability and the general education, or whether you do separate curriculum. And there was all this discussion about this among the professionals. When the kids came in, they said, we don't care about that. For us, it's stigma. Can we remove the stigma? That's what matters. We don't care about integration or not. It's the stigma. So it was interesting that a simple inclusion of new voices completely changed the tenor of the conversation. That's why social learning is so interesting, because it's very dependent on the mix of voice that you have around the table. So paying attention to the mix of voice is an essential part of the leadership, of that kind of social learning leadership that I was talking about.
So we might just take one more question because it's very relevant to this point that we're on now, and it's from Angela, and she asks, what are the best methods and tools to ensure that the task is kept on track, and what is a very democratic model? Democratic, I'm saying the wrong word there. Democratic model.
Yeah. Well, I mean, communities of practice are not necessarily democracies. They are partnerships. And in partnership, you respect each other, you listen to voices. But for us, what we do when we work with a community is, as I was saying, that we have identified certain leadership tasks. And so we kind of distribute that. So for instance, the whole question of voice I was talking about, when we work with a community, we have a few people think, do we have all the voices that we need here? Do the power relationship come in the way of some learning that we need to do? But there is another group that says, are we on task? Are we really creating value for the kind of difference we want to make? And that's another leadership task. We have some other leadership tasks, like, for instance, are we creating a good memory? Are we documenting what we are doing, what we're learning? So you can see that the more the members themselves understand and reflect on how the group acts as a learning partnership, the more chance you have that it's going to be successful. So it's not democracy in the sense of everybody's equal, or we make all decisions by majority vote. It's more democracy in the sense that it's everybody's responsibility if the community works or not, you know? And so, you know.
Great.
Yeah, so it's not, see, the community is not a service that, because I remember we were doing a survey, and it's actually my wife who said, we're doing a survey for a community, and we're saying, how can we ask people how they feel about the community? And instead of saying, how do you feel about the community? She said, maybe we should ask, what could you do to make this community serve you better? You see what I mean? So it's like, if it's your community, if you don't like it, do something.
Very good. Listen, Etienne, shall we move on, do you think, at this stage?
Yeah.
We'll try and pick up a few questions at the end as well. There's a few more in here.
So I don't know how much. So the enablers and barriers that I've had, that I've put on my slides, are very much reflected in the wordles that we've had. But I've put the enablers and barriers at two levels: at the level of the community or network, and at the level of the organizations, the surrounding organization or organizations, depending on the community. Because we've found that really the two things, there are two different set of enablers and barriers, even though they are interrelated. So at the level of the community, a few things that I wanted to highlight, because you can see that a lot of like trust and respect, internal leadership, finding a voice, all these I think have been discussed. The sense of ownership, I think that's really important, that the community has a sense of ownership. This is my community. So that's really to the organization. You never want to remove the sense of ownership from a community, even if it is formalized. What else? So we have talked about dominant voices. I have mentioned the danger of groupthink. That's a real barrier. So, because somebody was saying hegemony, I'm suspecting that they were talking about if some voice become dominant, then the learning capability of the group can really be heard. And if there is a lot of groupthink, then when you have a doubt or when you have something, sometimes you even suppress it in yourself because you think, oh, I must be wrong. Everybody seems to agree, you know. And so these are real barrier to the learning of a community. Yeah. Any other one that you would like me to comment on? Many of them are self-explanatory, I think.
Yeah, I might just read them out for anybody who might need them. So just to quickly rattle through them, the enablers: a high value on time, relevance to practice, shine a light, which I think what you mean there is that about being able to share practice? Is that what you're referring to?
Shine a light. I mean, like, if somebody does something for the community, shine a light on it, you know.
Very good.
Appreciate.
That's showcasing what
Yeah.
people are
Shine a
doing
light
well.
on the good thing. Yeah.
So the personal touch, getting those personal relationships, that's something that I found certainly within our link network has really been fuel for the network to keep it going. You know, those close personal relationships, trust and respect, and responsiveness and follow up. Finding a voice, I presume that, I mean, are you referring there to giving people the opportunity to grow within the network and find confidence to put forward their own views? Is that
Yeah, to feel free to be themselves. Yeah.
So we have internal leadership of the network as well and ownership. And then some of the barriers you have, you've mentioned dominant voices and groupthink already. A lack of continuity, is that people dropping in and out of the network? Is that what you're referring to
Yes,
there?
that can be that. That can be also like, you know, a webinar series where, oh, today we do this topic, next day we do this topic, and we move on instead of trying to create a loop. That loop that I was talking about in that cartoon that goes from the community to practice and back to the community. That's very important, and that requires continuity instead of just jumping from topic to topic.
Okay, that's something we'll be keeping in mind over the next 10 weeks as we work through these webinars to make sure we don't just drop it after 10 weeks and move on, that we
Well, I mean,
create something
it's a
and feedback
conference.
to the
That's
community.
okay.
Yeah.
But if you want a real learning network where there's an accumulation of learning, you want to be careful not to just jump from topic to topic.
That's some really interesting ones. I think we can move on, can we, Etienne? Is there anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the organization. We've talked about sponsorship. So when you have a person who is engaged with the community, listen to the community and brings ideas from the community into the organization, that create a kind of strategic partnership between the community and I think you in your description of your community, where they recommended hiring a kind of tsar or a person in charge. That's the kind of strategic partnership between a self-organized community and the more formal organization. That's really important, because that people then feel valued in the organization for who they are. Valuing the time, that's really important. Your supervisor should not tell you, hey, what are you wasting your time with those people? It should be understood as productive time for the organization. And then among the barriers in the organization, shifting support. That's one that maybe people have not thought of, because for us it's over time. We've seen some organization where they are all enthusiastic, yeah, let's do community, and then management drops the ball because there is another fed, there is all of a sudden something else, you know. And so this kind of shifting over time is really, because people invest their heart in a community and all of a sudden someone drops the ball. It can lead to cynicism.
And there's a couple of kind of a good few questions here that might kind of relate to that. So it's more just to comment on it really, that the theme coming out in some of the questions is, so David asks, how do you resolve the tension that may arise when learning networks are established as part of an organizational policy protocol? So it is that piece around, suddenly the organization is interested in something, you know, they have a reason to establish this community. So the learning networks, we talk about them flourishing in an environment of uncertainty, but at the same time, David points out that the outputs may be expected to comply with policy. And again, just that relates again to that kind of shifting support. Potentially, if that policy changes, then everything else is pulled from the?
That's right. Well, I think there are two things in your question. One is that if you encourage people to form a community, don't drop the ball from them, okay? Because they have invested themselves, who they are in that community. And the other thing is, the danger is to start giving tasks to a community, okay? To start micromanaging it top down. So it's really important, as I said earlier, that the community has a sense of ownership, that it is self-governed. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't give it tasks, in the sense that you could ask the committee a question, you know, like, which, I don't know, if you have your community and a group of university ask you, so which platform allow inclusion if we move online, for instance? That can be exciting for the community to debate. So it's an exciting task. But to ask the community to fill out papers, you know what I mean? Then all of a sudden it's a de-energizing task, and it will bring the community down, and it will remove that sense of ownership. So the danger in institutionalization is when it invades the community inside, you know, when there's a lot of red tape around.
So it's a bit of a balancing act then, really. What you're saying at the end is it's a balancing act between that sort of grassroots energy and the top-down support.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And you don't want that support to be oppressive from the top down. There has to be a some level of sort of autonomy of the network itself.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And so there's two related questions as well that have. So two people have asked a question, Sue and another attendee who hasn't put their name in, who has basically asked, how do you reach people who have little or no desire to change or engage in dialogue and influence strategic decisions? So is there, I think the question is in a roundabout way asking, is there a point in trying to engage these people? And if so, how, you know, to try to bring these people into a community?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no, our experience, but it's really just our own experience, is that it's better to work with the energy, you know, and to create a high energy community than to try to convince the skeptics, because you waste a lot of energy with those skeptics. So it's better for the community to become really engaged and produce good stuff. And, you know, it's like the hopping bar, right? Everybody wants to be there once they know that, oh, this bar is really hopping, you know? And you want your community to be a hopping bar. And if people don't want to come, you know, don't focus too much on them, because you will lose a lot of energy.
Does that mean we're allowed to have drinks in our communities of practice, Etienne?
Well, in Ireland, I'm sure.
Maybe we'll move on. There is a good few questions in the group, but I think we're kind of coming fairly close to the end. So maybe shift
So
shift
let me quickly just to mention that blending online and face-to-face is really part of the art of this community. You have some pictures from a very formal meeting where some people are online, some people are in a room, to someone carrying someone on a laptop. Because when we blend online and face-to-face, we often have a buddy. So people who are online have a face-to-face buddy, and they act as buddies to each other. That's what you see when the person is actually carrying someone on a laptop around, all the way to that picture at the bottom where you see some people having lunch, but there's a computer, there's actually an iPad on the table, and someone is also having lunch. So sometimes in online, what's difficult to reproduce are those informal time, you know? And so in this case, that person said, okay, I'm gonna have lunch too, but we'll have lunch together. And so it's important to also include this informal time, because they are very important for learning. And I just wanted to say very quickly about how to get going. First, think of the value proposition. What value is this community going to create for members, and perhaps for the organization if you need to negotiate with the organization, but to have a sense of the value proposition. And then talk. you don't start a community, just boom, start a community. Talk to potential members and yeah, share your value proposition and refine it in the process. These conversation at the beginning of, they are already the building of the community. They're not just like a survey where you get information, what do you care about? It's like imagining a community and seeing who could take internal leadership to work with me to form that community. So this conversation, these one-on-one conversations are really important ahead of the beginning of the community to get a good sense of what's there. And then once you decide to launch your community, there are three key questions that you want to address. One is, who are we? Who is here? You know? And so we often do like the picture at the top of the slide, a cafe or something like a cafe conversation where people engage with each other. What are you struggling with? What are your hopes? Who are you? What happens in your college, in your practice? Then to get a sense of what difference do we want to make? You know, what would be different if our community was successful? And we often do that in smaller groups. And then the last question is, what can we do? Are there things we can do together that are likely to bring about that difference? So just 3 steps really to make sure that you go through all 3 as you launch your own network. And just to conclude, actually, just to explain the pictures. So the first one up on top is a cafe conversation where people move from table to table to engage in conversation with each other about their struggles and their hopes. Actually, the second picture is forming groups around issues that have come up. And the third picture is actually a group working together, trying to develop almost like a learning agenda for the community. And the last picture, which I thought was relevant today, is a community that started among people who fund projects in infectious disease surveillance. And after the Ebola crisis, they felt that they needed to form a community to work together because they were often working at cross purpose and to learn from each other. And so what you see on this picture, we created a big matrix on the wall. And at the top of the matrix for each column, you have the names of the different organizations that are represented there. And this was in the afternoon. In the morning, we had a cafe and all sorts of questions had come up. And so the rows of the matrix, on this big matrix on the wall, the rows represent questions that they would like to know about each other. Like I don't remember all the questions that came up, but one of them was, do you develop vaccines? This is the kind of question that they wanted to know about each other so that they could find learning partnership. And so then each organization answered all those questions with three kind of papers. Green means, yes, we do that. And we think we do it pretty well. Blue means we don't do that, or we don't do it very well. We would like to learn how to do it better. Red was, no, this is out of scope. We don't deal with that. And so you can see on the wall a kind of picture emerging of that community. And it was really good for them to see the community, its question, its struggles, and its members and actually this was then transferred to an Excel sheet, a Google sheet, so that people who actually couldn't come to the meeting could also fill out their own column. And then we had each organization describe their column, and then we put people in pairs, and each of them took a row and kind of analyzed, so where are we as a community around that question of, do you develop vaccine? Do you use technology to detect infectious disease early, and so on and so forth. So it was really an interesting a way to create a picture of who are we in this room and where are the places where we could work together.
I think that's a really nice story to finish on. It's very UDL as well, which is, you know, to create visual pictures to go along with the conversations that we have. I think that's a very nice way to bring us to an end. There is some more questions in the chat box at the end, but what I might suggest is if we just get to some of the closing sort of information, if you wouldn't mind popping it onto the holding slide at the end there.
Yep.
We might just tee up the next couple of sessions, and then we might just answer a few for anyone who wants to stay around, if that's okay.
Yep.
So just to say, next up, the next session in our 10-week conference takes place next Friday at 2:30. It's the final of the John Kelly Award for Universal Design for Learning. If you don't know much about UDL, you're interested, or you want to see a bit more of what UDL looks like in practice, you'll see 3 educators here demonstrating what they've done with UDL, how they've used UDL as a lens to transform their teaching practice. And there'll be 10-minute presentations across where across FET, across HE, so in different settings, and you'll see what UDL actually looks like when it's done with real purpose. So I think if anybody's interested there, you can go to ahead.ie/conference2020. I should also highlight, and you can sign up for this session at that link as well, that the document that was released today, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into that project, the UDL for FET project, on May 8th. And Mary Quirk and Patricia McCarthy, who are the authors of the framework document, are going to join us, and we'll give you a little bit of an update also on what's happening with our project moving forward. So if you're interested in that, you can also sign up at ahead.ie/conference2020. Lastly, if you'd like to take this conversation onto Twitter, the hashtag is #ahead2020. So if you'd like to really help us, actually, if you did enjoy this session today, to tell some of your networks about it so that we can promote the rest of the conference and get more people to engage with these CPD opportunities, we'd really appreciate that. And also, if you wanted to drop into the chat box, if you had any comments for us moving forward as how we do these webinars, could be technical, could be maybe just how we've approached the engagement, anything like that, please do drop it into the chat box and we'll take it on board for our next sessions. So with that in mind, we might just address some of the final questions that have arisen, Etienne, and anybody who needs to go can jump away. So let me just flick through them here. Andrina has asked, is there any evidence of kind of regional, national, cultural or gender differences within approaches to communities of practice? And if so, any advice? So across your work, across different regions and cultures, are you seeing major differences into how people connect professionally?
Yeah, yes, definitely. And you have to take that into account. Less than you would believe, because once people find a problem that they all care about, there's something that happens. I don't know what it is. That I don't want to idealize this, because there are cultures where speaking your mind is viewed as rude. There are cultures where when you mix different cultures. For instance, there was a community in an automotive company where the Japanese didn't feel comfortable being in the same teleconferences as the Americans and the Europeans, because they felt that they could never interrupt. They could never get in, because the Americans just talking. And so, yeah, they decided to have their own community separate because of that cultural thing that you don't interrupt people, But it was interesting, after a year, they decided to join back the global community. So there are certainly difference when we were working in Southeast Asia. Yes, there are different differences. There are definitely gender differences. It is complicated in the gender dynamics to reach that place of engaged uncertainty, because for a woman, engaging uncertainty may be interpreted as incompetence, but for a man to engage in uncertainty may be viewed, oh, well, this person is very humble, So there are certainly gender issues to be aware of. And that is why we often have a group that we call the community keepers, whose leadership task is to pay attention to that, whose voice is being silenced. See, the problem that you don't want is that someone's voice is being self-censored or silenced by the community. That is what you want to pay attention to.
Very interesting. So there's a couple of comments. One, Tracy makes just a comment about the approach that she's used in her institution is to go bottom up, middle out, and top down. So she says this takes many forms, but including key stakeholders across campus and having leadership support is key. So she's echoed that. My colleague Caroline from AHEAD, who was the coordinator of the WAM program, has a comment related to that, just saying that she did an event in WAM just before Christmas where they focused on disability learning networks within their big employers that WAM works with. So she again echoes the point that senior leadership and sponsorship is absolutely a key element to sustainability of those networks. And there's two really.
By the way, speaking about that, when I speak to people, because many organizations have someone who is in charge of supporting the community, often one of their role is to educate managers about what it means to engage with the community, because managers are often used to not engage or engage if they are in control. But with the community, you have to engage, otherwise it's marginalized, but you engage without control, you know, and that's a new role, I think, for many managers.
So there's two really interesting questions. One is from Miriam. She asks, could communities of practice be useful for students as a support and a collegial network of learning for them? So just to share some of my own reflections on this, in our digital badge for UDL, which is a CPD program that we run, kind of introducing UDL to educators, we take the approach of, and it's an approach that the National Forum has recognised, the National Forum for the Enhancement of Teaching and Learning here in Ireland has recognised, which is to develop peer triads, and they're usually groups of 3 or 4 people, so they're very small communities, but they work together throughout the course, throughout the 10 weeks of this course, and they check in regularly to discuss kind of various issues that are arising within the curriculum as they go through that course. And so I think that definitely is developed communities of practice could be a really interesting support, and it's one of the feedback that we get from our students in that course is that that's actually one of the most valuable bits of the course for them, is that engagement. So I think that's really nice. Suzanne has asked, have you any suggestions for revitalizing and sustaining a flagging community of practice?
Well, first of all, you know, a flagging community of practice may be in need of death, you know. So there's no point putting a community of life support. If a community has lived out its utility, let it go. It may be reformed later. Now, you have to know, why is a community flagging? Is a community flagging because the leaders don't have enough time to do things interesting? Is the community flagging because it is not producing enough value to the members? So I think it's, for me, the first thing that I would do if a community was flagging was to go on the phone and call a few members and say, okay, so what do you think? You know, what would be useful for you? And to find out how the community is responding to that or not, and to decide, oh yeah, no, this community should continue because people are really expecting a lot from it, but it's not producing the stuff they're expecting, and then to start making sure the community produces the kind of stuff that people find helpful in the difference they want to make. Or to say, okay, no, this community is really has lived its usefulness and we should let it go. But if you don't have conversation with people, you're never going to know.
I love that idea of putting your community of practice to death. It's very very emotive kind of language. But we're going to finish up, I think, here, because we just have one final comment that Lynn has mentioned. So she said she's seen some great cops at universities with academic departments appointing lecturers with little knowledge of the culture of the department and also a knowledge of disability. So linking with, so basically her point I think is here around they're linking someone with the kind of academic knowledge within a department with someone else with disability knowledge, and that piece of sharing has been a vital and created a great impact and benefit for students using that approach. So I think it's a nice way to end, because it's about that diversity of voices kind of coming together and learning from each other. So listen, on that note, Etienne, I'd like to really, really thank you for that session. It's been so fruitful for me as we look to support Solus in the implementation of UDL for FET, and as we work, to be honest, across all our work in higher education and further education, as well as our work in this sphere of employment. I think lots of what's come out today is going to be very helpful for us in kind of rethinking what we're doing, and particularly about delivering those emerging concepts that people need those opportunities to understand collectively. So I want to thank you very much, and to thank everyone for joining us from across the world today. We had well over 200 participants join in the session, and I hope you'll all continue to join us over the next 10 weeks time. So if you'd like to sign up, go to ahead.ie/conference2020, and the program is developing there as we confirm sessions going through. So thank you very much at the end.
Yes, thank you for having me. Really, that was inspiring.
Yeah, and very, very interesting conversation, and I think you're a really engaging chat for me personally to discuss with. So hopefully sometime we will get to meet face to face and have that drink that in the hopping bar that we that you discussed. So thank you very much, and take care, guys. I'll see you all later.
Thank you. Bye bye.